You think you're clever? You think you can just stand there? Tell me what you know. No! I don't think I'm clever. I know it. And I know you don't have enough to hold me.
You think you can lie to me? Ha! Try something. I'm gonna break you.
I know you did it. Tell me what happened. I ain't saying shit. Where is she? Tell me where she is. Now! I don't know, I swear to you. Stop this. Get down here now. You've got nowhere to run. I'm not running. I didn't do this.
You're lying to me.
You know exactly where it is. I have nothing to tell you.
Boots. You don't own this building, counselor. You just decorate it. That was the first thing Detective Cole Bannister said as he stepped over the threshold of a shattered glass door, 31 floors above downtown Atlanta, at 11:52 on a Thursday night in October. Boots. He said it the way a man says something he has rehearsed in the mirror. He wanted it to land. Boots. He wanted Marcus Whitfield to flinch. Marcus did not flinch. He stood behind his desk in a charcoal suit that had not wrinkled once in the 11 hours he'd worn it, his hands loose at his sides, his eyes tracking Bannister's every step across the ruined carpet. Boots. On the corner of that desk sat a small brass compass, dented on one side, the glass face scratched into a fine web of hairline cracks. Boots. It had belonged to his father. It would matter later. Remember it. Boots. 3 feet away, behind a wall that looked like oak paneling, and as accuracy a 1/4 inch of hardened steel, a 29-year-old forensic accountant named Amara Voss knelt in the dark with her hand clamped over her own mouth, watching all of it happen on a laptop screen bathed in the pale green wash of night vision. Boots. Nobody in that office knew yet how the next 90 minutes would end, but somebody was already recording it. 3 miles away, in a federal sedan idling at a red light on Peachtree Street, a man was about to receive a phone call that would decide whether Marcus Whitfield lived to see sunrise. Boots. He didn't know it yet either. Nobody in this story knows anything at the start. That's the whole point. Boots. 6 hours earlier, the city of Atlanta looked like it always did on a Thursday in October. Brake lights bleeding down Peachtree Street, the smell of rain 2 hours away, office windows going dark floor by floor as the workday drained out of downtown. Boots. Marcus Whitfield sat in his office on the 31st floor of the Ashford Tower with the lights low, reviewing a deposition transcript for a case that had nothing to do with what was coming. Boots. He was 44 years old. He had graduated first in his class from Morehouse College, then gone on to Georgetown Law, on a full scholarship he'd earned by outworking every advantage he didn't have. Boots. For 16 years, he had run Whitfield Legal Group out of 2 rented rooms, and then, eventually, out of the entire 31st floor, a firm that specialized in exactly one thing: suing the people who believed a badge, a title, or a bank balance made them untouchable. Boots. He kept a compass on his desk that didn't point anywhere useful anymore. The needle had been stuck at northeast since 1994. Boots. It had belonged to his father, Samuel Whitfield, a beat cop who spent 22 years patrolling the west side of Atlanta and was passed over for sergeant 4 separate times by men with half his arrest record and all of his skin tone's advantages. Boots. Samuel never sued anybody. He never even filed a formal complaint. He just kept walking his beat, kept mentoring the rookies nobody else wanted to train, and died of a heart attack in his own driveway at 59, still holding a badge that had never once said sergeant on it. Boots. Marcus was 17 the year his father died, and he remembered exactly one thing his father said to him the week before. Not advice, not a lecture, just a tired man sitting on the porch steps turning that compass over in his hands. Boots. A badge only means something if the man wearing it decides it does, son. Same with a law degree. Same with anything. Boots. Marcus had put the compass in his desk drawer the day he passed the bar, and moved it to the desktop itself 16 years later, the same week he made partner in his own name on the front door. Boots. He became the lawyer his father never had access to. Boots. That was the whole engine of his career, and he rarely said it out loud to anyone, except, once, to a first-year associate named Priya Deshmukh, who now ran the firm's civil rights docket, and who would, before this story was finished, make one small decision that mattered more than she ever knew. Boots. At 6:14 p.m., his phone buzzed. Not a call, a location ping from a burner number he'd handed out exactly 9 times in his career. each time to someone whose life depended on nobody else having it. Boots. I'm 3 blocks away. I think they're behind me. 12 minutes later, Amara Voss walked into his office, soaked to the collar in a rain that hadn't started yet. Sweat, not rain. The kind that comes from running the last 2 blocks. Boots. She was small, precise, wire-rimmed glasses fogged from her own breath, and she was clutching a red leather ledger against her chest, the way a person holds something between themselves and a bullet. Boots. They know Mr. Whitfield, she said. Her voice cracked on his name. She had been hired 11 weeks earlier by the city comptroller's office to conduct a routine audit of the Fulton County Municipal Pension Fund, a job so unremarkable that her firm had assigned it to their newest associate almost as a formality. Boots. 8 weeks in, she found a rounding error of $340,000 in a reallocation account that shouldn't have existed. 4 weeks after that, the rounding error had unspooled into a $6. Boots. 1 million slush fund controlled entirely by a joint city-county narcotics task force that, on paper, did not have the authority to hold a checking account, let alone move money through 4 shell corporations registered in Wilmington, Delaware, and the Cayman Islands. Boots. The money wasn't only being stolen. Boots. It was funding things that don't show up on a budget line. Surveillance equipment bought off the books, silence purchased from people who'd seen too much, and in at least one case, Amara had traced through 11 months of wire transfers, a payment of $28,000 made 4 days after a local journalist named Ethan Marsh was found dead in his car at the bottom of a ravine off Highway 316, in what the medical examiner's report called an apparent single-vehicle accident. Boots. She had been alone in her apartment on Boulevard Avenue 3 nights earlier when she first noticed the sedan, a gray Impala with a cracked taillight, parked across the street with its engine running for 40 minutes and then gone. Boots. She'd told herself it was nothing. She told herself the same thing the second night, and the third, until telling herself stopped working. Boots. I saw the gray sedan outside my apartment again tonight, Amara said, sitting so hard in the leather chair across from Marcus's desk that it rolled 2 inches backward. Boots. It followed me to the MARTA station. It followed me here. I shouldn't have come. I've put you in danger. Boots. Marcus set down his pen. He walked around the desk, poured a glass of water from a crystal carafe, and set it in front of her without a word, giving her 3 full seconds of silence before he spoke, because he'd learned a long time ago that panic needs somewhere to land before it can hear anything. Boots. Breathe, he said. You're in a secure building. Security downstairs are former state troopers. And you're in my office. The law still means something in this room. Boots. The law doesn't mean anything to Detective Bannister, she said, and her voice finally steadied into something harder. He runs the task force. Boots. I found his signature on the incorporation documents for the shell company in Delaware. He knows I have the ledger. Boots. He knows I copied the drives. Marcus glanced at his watch. 11:31 p.m. Special Agent Victor Alvarez, FBI Public Corruption Unit, is 14 minutes out with a federal escort. Boots. The moment he walks through that door, you go into protective custody, and that ledger goes into a federal evidence vault. Boots. Bannister is a man with a badge. He is not a god. He cannot force his way into a private law office. Boots. Even as he said it, something at the base of his skull went cold. He glanced at the security monitor mounted behind his desk. Boots. The lobby feed had gone to black. The elevator bank feed was a wash of gray static. Someone had cut the building's surveillance. Boots. Marcus? Amara said, catching the change in his posture before he could hide it. Then they both heard it. The stairwell door on the 31st floor slamming open, and Boots. Boots. Not the even, professional stride of federal agents arriving on schedule. The heavy, entitled tread of men who had never once in their lives been told to wait outside. Boots. Remember the compass on the desk. It's about to matter. Marcus had 14 seconds, by his own later count, between the sound of the stairwell door and the sound of his own office door being kicked off its hinges. Boots. He used all 14 of them. He pressed a button hidden beneath the front lip of his desk. Boots. Across the room, a section of the oaked bookshelf shifted outward with a low mechanical groan, revealing the seam of a reinforced steel door. A server room the previous tenant, a paranoid hedge fund manager, with 3 federal indictments of his own, had built as a panic room. Boots. It was soundproofed, armored, and wired into nothing that could be traced from the outside. Take the ledger. Take your laptop. Boots. Get in there now. What's happening? Amara was already moving, the ledger nearly slipping from her shaking hands before she caught it against her chest. Boots. Bannister's here. Marcus physically steered her toward the opening, his voice dropping into something flat and absolute. Lock the deadbolt. Boots. Don't make a sound, no matter what you hear. There's a second laptop on the server rack, hardwired to a camera in the smoke detector above my desk. Boots. You'll see and hear everything. I need you to hit record, and I need you to send the stream link to Agent Alvarez's emergency contact address the second the feed is live. Boots. What about you? I'm a lawyer, Marcus said, straightening his tie with a steadiness that had nothing to do with how he felt and everything to do with 16 years of practice. Boots. I'm going to do my job. He shut the steel door just as the glass double doors of Whitfield Legal Group exploded inward across the reception floor in a spray of diamond-sized fragments. Boots. He stepped back to the center of his office, squared his shoulders, and waited. The game had started. The door to Marcus's private office didn't open. Boots. It was kicked, the brass handle punching a fist-sized crater into the drywall behind it. Boots. Detective Cole Bannister filled the doorway, 6'3". Built like something poured rather than born, a neck the width of a fire hydrant, and a pair of pale, flat eyes that looked like they'd stopped registering other people as human sometime around his 15th year on the force. Boots. His badge swung on a chain over a rumpled gray suit and a rain-slicked trench coat he hadn't bothered to remove. Boots. Behind him, 26-year-old Officer Danny Pruitt hovered in the hallway, eyes darting across the mahogany and the framed law degrees like he expected the walls themselves to file a complaint. Boots. Bannister didn't speak right away. He walked the room first, the Persian rug, the leather furniture, the skyline through floor-to-ceiling glass, leaving wet, muddy boot prints across $4,000 of hand-knotted wool. Boots. Nice place, he said finally, in a voice like gravel dragged over broken tile. Must cost a fortune. You do real well for yourself, playing the professional victim. Boots. Marcus didn't move his hands from where they rested, flat and calm, on the surface of his desk. Detective Bannister. Boots. I assume you have a warrant to destroy my front door and trespass in a licensed legal practice at midnight. Boots. Bannister laughed, a short, humorless bark, and picked up the crystal paperweight from the corner of the desk, tossing it hand to hand like he was weighing it. Boots. Warrant? Come on, counselor, let's not get bogged down in paperwork. We had a tip that a fugitive was hiding in this building. Boots. Exigent circumstances. Had to move fast. A fugitive. Marcus's voice went colder, not louder. Fascinating, because the only people currently breaking the law in this room are the ones wearing badges. Boots. You have 10 seconds to walk out of my office before I call the commissioner, the mayor, and the district attorney, in that order. Boots. Bannister slammed the paperweight down hard enough to leave a divot in the polished wood, leaned across the desk until his coffee and tobacco breath was 6 inches from Marcus's face. Boots. You don't call the shots here, Whitfield. You think a Georgetown degree and a $2,000 suit makes you untouchable? I know what you are. Boots. And right now, you're harboring a thief. A little accountant named Amara Voss, who stole city property. If you believe my client committed a crime, Marcus said, unmoving, present your evidence to a grand jury and secure an indictment. Boots. Until then, she retains every constitutional right you are currently violating. Get out of my office. That was the moment something in Bannister's face changed. The moment the polite fiction dropped entirely. Because in his world, people cowered, and this black attorney was looking at him with a stillness that felt like a slap. Boots. Tear it apart, Bannister barked over his shoulder to Pruitt. Pruitt hesitated, pale. Sir, this is a law office. Boots. These files are privileged. I said, tear it apart. Officer Danny Pruitt swallowed hard and began yanking filing cabinets open, dumping thousands of pages of confidential client documents across the hardwood, sweeping law books off the shelves in avalanches of leather and paper. Boots. Marcus watched every second of it without moving a muscle, filing every torn folder in his memory, the way another man might count breaths to stay calm. Boots. 2 floors below, in the parking garage stairwell, a night shift paralegal named Priya Deshmukh had come back for a phone charger she'd left at her desk and found the lobby dark and the elevator bank dead. Boots. She stood frozen at the fire door for 11 full seconds, close enough to hear the crash of glass and the low, furious rumble of a man's voice she didn't recognize, and had to make a choice nobody had trained her for. Run or call someone. Boots. Her hands were shaking so badly it took her 3 tries to unlock her phone. She didn't call the police. Boots. She called Special Agent Alvarez's direct line, a number Marcus had given every associate at the firm on their first day, with instructions to use it exactly once in an emergency and never for anything less. Boots. She stayed on that stairwell landing for the next 40 minutes, phone pressed to her ear, feeding Alvarez's team a live description of every sound she could hear through 2 floors of concrete, too frightened to go up and too loyal to leave. Boots. Remember, Priya, she isn't finished yet either. This is a serious miscalculation, Bannister, Marcus said, low even. You're operating on the assumption you can cover this up. Boots. But you crossed a line the second you breached that door, and you're never walking it back. I draw the lines. Boots. Bannister shoved past him, yanking open desk drawers, throwing framed photographs and a fountain pen collection onto the floor. You think this is a movie, Whitfield? Boots. You think the good guy wins because he knows the law? The law is whatever I write in my report tomorrow morning. Boots. And my report's going to say we entered these premises pursuing a fleeing suspect, and that you violently resisted, forcing us to subdue you. Boots. He paused. From the inside pocket of his trench coat, he pulled a small plastic bag of white powder and tossed it onto the center of the desk with a soft, obscene little thud. Boots. And look what we found in the counselor's desk. A dark grin split his face. Felony possession with intent. That's a disbarment, Whitfield. Boots. That's 5 years in a Georgia State facility. Marcus looked at the bag, then back at Bannister. Boots. The audacity of it should have staggered him, and somewhere underneath the mask it did. But he kept his face a wall, because 3 feet away, behind a 1/4 inch of steel, Amara was watching, and every second Bannister kept talking was a second closer to the grave he was digging for himself. Boots. Planting evidence, Marcus said softly, arms crossing. That's sloppy, Cole. That smells like desperation. You're panicking because the slush fund's dry and the FBI is already circling the missing pension money. Boots. You need that ledger to know exactly what Amara found, so you can scrub the trail before Monday's audit committee meeting. Boots. Bannister went very still. His hand hovered over an open drawer. He turned his head slowly, eyes locking onto Marcus with something colder than anger. Boots. Where is she? In the server room, Amara Voss sat on the floor with her back against a rack of humming machines, headphones clamped over her ears, watching the scene unfold in high-definition night vision on the laptop screen David had left charged and waiting. Boots. She watched Officer Pruitt tear artwork off the walls looking for a safe. She watched Bannister toss the bag of cocaine onto the desk, like a man discarding a receipt. Boots. Her fingers trembled over the keyboard as she confirmed the recording software was pulling both video and audio to an encrypted cloud server. And then, following the instructions Marcus had drilled into her 3 days earlier for exactly this scenario, she opened a secure communications portal and pasted the live stream link directly into the emergency inbox reserved for Special Agent Victor Alvarez. Boots. Please, she thought, watching the little icon spin. Please open it. Back in the office, Bannister took a step closer, drawing his service weapon and letting it hang loosely against his thigh. Not aimed, not yet, but the implication filled the room like smoke. Boots. Where is the girl, Whitfield? I have no idea what you're referring to, Marcus said evenly. My client's whereabouts are not your concern. Boots. Bannister smiled the way a man smiles right before he decides honesty is a luxury he can finally afford. You think you're smart? Boots. You think that Rolex and that scotch make you better than me. Out on the street, I'm the one who makes the weather. Boots. You stole from the city, Marcus corrected, and now his voice cut clean through the wreckage of his own office. Boots. You and your task force extorted local businesses, funneled pension money through shell corporations, and bought real estate in the Caymans with it. Boots. It's not a secret anymore, Cole. You're finished. Bannister laughed, a loud, ugly bark that bounced off the ruined walls. Boots. Who's going to prove it? The accountant? She's a mouse. I've spent 19 years building relationships with judges, with the DA's office, with brass all the way up to the 4th floor. Boots. You think a grand jury takes the word of a disbarred black lawyer, caught with a pound of coke in his desk over a decorated police officer? Boots. I think the truth has a habit of surviving, Marcus said. Truth is a commodity, Bannister sneered, and leaned against the edge of the desk, drunk on the adrenaline of the raid, on the sheer physical dominance of the room. Boots. He wanted Marcus broken before he was bruised. So he talked, You want the truth? Fine, I took the money. Boots. $4 million over 6 years. And you know what? The city owed me that. I bled for this town for 2 decades and got a pension that wouldn't cover a used truck. Boots. So I took a little off the top. Set up the shelves with Sal Moretti. You know him as the Ledger. The accountant used to run books for half the syndicates on the east side before he flipped legit, mostly. Boots. Signed the transfer orders myself. And the officers on your payroll, Marcus said, testing him, keeping his voice level, almost bored. Boots. How many? 11. Bannister said it the way another man might report a batting average. 11 good men who understood the job doesn't pay what it should, so I made up the difference. Boots. You think that's corruption? I call it fixing a broken system with my own 2 hands. He picked up a framed photograph of Marcus's law school graduating class and threw it against the wall, glass exploding across the baseboard. Boots. Nobody in this city gave me anything. I built that task force from nothing. I earned every dollar that came through it. Boots. He was pacing now, drunk on his own confession, unaware that every syllable was pouring into a hidden microphone 8 feet above his head. Boots. And that reporter, Ethan from the Sentinel, the one who started digging into what was moving through the evidence locker. I didn't wait for a subpoena. Boots. Didn't file a motion. I sent my guys to have a conversation with him on 316. Car went off the shoulder around a curve everybody knows is bad in the rain. Boots. Official cause, single vehicle accident. Tragic. Case closed. In the server room, Amara's blood went to ice water. She was listening to a confession to murder, an unsolved homicide that had led the local news for 11 straight days the previous spring. Boots. A notification blinked in the corner of her screen. User V. Alvarez. Federal has joined the secure stream. You should know this before it happens. The smoke detector camera above David's, above Marcus's, desk had a range of 30 feet and a battery life of 6 hours. Boots. It had been running for 11 minutes. It had 8 more to go before Bannister said the one sentence that would end him. Boots. Back in the wrecked office, Bannister's confession curdled into something meaner as the silence stretched. He noticed the shift in the air before he understood it. The way a predator notices weather changing. Boots. You're stalling, he said, gun coming up loosely in his hand, not aimed but no longer resting either. You've been stalling this whole conversation. Boots. Where's the ledger, Whitfield? Right here, Marcus said quietly. And for the first time that night, he smiled, small and razor-thin. Boots. It's been recording since the second you walked through that door. Bannister's face didn't process it right away. His eyes went to the bookshelf. Boots. To the smoke detector on the ceiling. Back to Marcus. That was the frozen moment. Nobody in the room moved. Boots. The only sound was the wind hammering the windows 31 floors above the street, and somewhere far off, a siren that hadn't yet realized it was coming for this address. Boots. Bannister's jaw worked once, twice, no sound coming out. The full shape of what he'd just done arriving in his skull 1 horrifying inch at a time. Boots. Then the office door, what remained of it, was kicked fully off its remaining hinge. FBI, nobody move. Boots. Drop your weapons. 6 agents in full tactical gear flooded the doorway, rifles raised, red laser sights cutting through the dust and drywall powder still hanging in the air, converging on Bannister's chest and forehead in a constellation of dots. Boots. Special Agent Victor Alvarez stepped through the formation last, holding a tablet in one gloved hand, his expression the particular kind of calm that belongs only to men who have waited a very long time for a very specific moment. Boots. Agent Alvarez, Bannister said, lowering his weapon a half-inch, confusion flooding his face. What is this? This is a sanctioned local operation. Boots. We're executing a search for a fugitive. Actually, detective, Alvarez said, and turned the tablet around so the green-tinted live feed filled the screen. Bannister's own face, staring back at himself in real time. You're currently executing a full confession to embezzlement, evidence tampering, civil rights violations, and the first-degree murder of a journalist. Boots. Bannister's face lost every drop of color it had. This is a deep fake, he said, and his voice, for the first time all night, thinned into something close to a whine. Boots. You're out of your jurisdiction. That's an illegal wiretap. Anything I said is inadmissible. You've got no warrant. Alvarez didn't blink. Boots. He drew a folded sheet of parchment from the inner pocket of his windbreaker. Actually, I do. Signed 40 minutes ago by Magistrate Judge Walter Hutchins of the Northern District of Georgia. Boots. We had enough probable cause from the financial forensics alone to get a wiretap authorization on your personal line. But your little speech about putting a reporter's car off the road on 316? Boots. That gave us exigent circumstances to breach tonight instead of waiting for morning. You did all the work for us, Cole. Boots. Officer Danny Pruitt broke first. He looked at 6 rifles, then at the bag of cocaine sitting on the desk, then at his own hands, and understood in one collapsing instant that his career, his freedom, and every version of his future he'd imagined were all gone in the same 90 seconds. Boots. He dropped the crowbar he'd been using to pry open a wall panel. It rang against the floor like a bell. Boots. I didn't know, he sobbed, hands going up, knees hitting the hardwood so fast he'd have bruises by morning. I swear to God, I didn't know about the reporter. Boots. He told me it was surplus cash we were skimming. I didn't kill anybody. I'll testify. I'll tell you everything. Boots. Please don't shoot. Shut your mouth, Danny. The veins in Bannister's neck bulged against his collar, the betrayal snapping something loose behind his eyes. Boots. For one terrible second, 19 years of unchecked power told him there was still a way out of this room, and his knuckles went white around the grip of his service weapon. Boots. The barrel dipped, almost imperceptibly toward Marcus. Do it, Alvarez said, quiet as a held breath, the tactical team's fingers tightening on their triggers. Boots. Give me one reason. Just twitch your wrist. Bannister looked at the lasers burning into his chest. Then he looked at Marcus Whitfield, who had not moved, had not flinched, had not once in 90 minutes given him the fear he'd come here to collect. Boots. Marcus wasn't looking at a dangerous man anymore. He was looking at a man who was already finished, and something about the absolute stillness of that gaze took the last of the fight out of Bannister all at once. Boots. The gun slipped from his fingers and hit the ruined Persian rug with a dull final thud. On the ground. Boots. Face down now. 3 agents swarmed him without the professional courtesy, usually extended between law enforcement. They put a boot between his shoulder blades and pressed his face into shattered glass and spilled potting soil, while the zip-zip-zip of flex cuffs cinched behind his back. Boots. Pruitt was cuffed beside him, sobbing into the carpet. Alvarez stepped over Bannister's prone body and crossed to the desk. Boots. Mr. Whitfield, are you hurt? I'm perfectly fine, Agent Alvarez. Thank you for your prompt arrival. Marcus straightened his jacket, walked around the desk, and crouched just far enough that Bannister's face, pressed sideways into broken glass, could see him clearly. Boots. I told you, Cole, I don't need a gun to win. I just needed you to be exactly who you are. Boots. Bannister could only spit blood and dirt onto his own ruined rug. Marcus stood, crossed to the bookshelf, and pressed the hidden release. Boots. The steel door hissed open. Amara Voss stood in the threshold, the red ledger clutched to her chest, laptop bag over one shoulder, shaking so hard her teeth chattered, but her eyes, when they landed on Bannister zip-tied on the floor, held something that hadn't been there 3 hours earlier. Boots. Something close to defiance, Miss Voss. Alvarez said, his voice. You're entirely safe. I have a car waiting downstairs and a federal protective detail for the next 72 hours. Boots. She didn't hand him a copy. She walked straight to him and put the original ledger in his hands. Page 31, she said, her voice finally holding steady. Boots. That's the routing number for the Cayman shell. Sal Moretti's signature is on the second line. All 3. $4 million is traceable. Boots. Every officer on the task force payroll is listed on page 44. Bannister, still pinned under a knee, let out a low, wordless groan of pure despair. Boots. The mouse had brought down the king. Here's what you don't know yet. And what makes the next 400 words matter? The wheels of federal justice grind slowly. Boots. But when they finally catch, they don't stop until there's nothing left to grind. 14 months later, the Richard B. Boots. Russell Federal Building in downtown Atlanta was ringed with satellite trucks, steel barricades, and enough press credentials to paper a wall. Boots. The corruption trial of the decade, that was the phrase the Atlanta Journal-Constitution used, and it stuck, had reached its final week. Boots. Cole Bannister's collapse was not quiet. It was national, televised, and total. The moment the FBI released the night vision confession footage to the public, the Fraternal Order of Police severed all ties with him within 72 hours and refused to fund a single hour of his legal defense. Boots. The mayor stood on the steps of City Hall and called him a stain on every badge in this city, while ordering a full internal affairs audit of the narcotics task force he'd built. Boots. But the worst damage came from the men he'd bullied into loyalty. Boots. Facing a possible death penalty enhancement for his role in Ethan Marsh's death, Officer Danny Pruitt signed a sweeping federal plea agreement and spent 3 grueling days on the witness stand describing, in a shaking, broken voice, exactly how Bannister had orchestrated the extortion, the executions, and the 6-year embezzlement scheme. Boots. Pruitt was 26 years old and 18 months out of the academy the night he stood in Marcus's office with a crowbar in his hand. Boots. He would serve 7 years on a reduced sentence for evidence tampering and obstruction, and on the day he walked out of a minimum security facility in Talladega, the only person waiting for him in the parking lot was his mother, holding a paper bag with a change of clothes because she hadn't known what else to bring. Boots. He never spoke to the press. He never wrote a book. He worked at a warehouse loading dock for 2 years, then enrolled in community college to study social work, and told the one reporter who eventually tracked him down that he thought about Ethan Marsh's mother every single day and expected he would for the rest of his life. Boots. It wasn't redemption exactly. It was just a man trying to carry what he'd allowed to happen without setting it down on anyone else. Boots. Sal Moretti, the ledger, followed 2 weeks later, trading a warehouse of financial records for full immunity. What the federal audit ultimately uncovered went far beyond the ledger Amara had carried through the rain that first night. Boots. Investigators found 7 other Fulton County residents over the previous decade who had filed complaints against Bannister's task force, a store owner strong-armed into paying protection fees disguised as fines, a teenage boy who spent 4 months in juvenile detention on planted evidence Bannister later admitted under oath he'd fabricated, a retired nurse whose home was raided on a warrant obtained using a fabricated informant who did not exist. Boots. Every one of those complaints had been filed, logged, and quietly closed without action, buried in the same internal review process that had for 19 years protected Bannister instead of the people he was sworn to serve. Boots. The system hadn't failed by accident. It had worked exactly the way it was built to work, until the night one attorney refused to let a confession disappear into a filing cabinet. Boots. Bannister sat at the defense table utterly alone, marooned on an island built entirely out of his own arrogance. On the morning of sentencing, Marcus Whitfield sat in the front row of the gallery in a flawless charcoal suit, a silent, immovable presence in a courtroom vibrating with tension. Boots. Amara Voss sat beside him, no longer the trembling woman in a rain-soaked coat, but a sharp, composed professional in a navy blazer, 3 months into a new role as a senior financial investigator with the Department of Justice's Public Integrity Section, a position she'd been offered directly because of the case file she herself had helped build. Boots. The doors opened. Bannister was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, hands manacled to a belly chain, ankles shackled. The man who had once filled a doorway like a wall of muscle had visibly shrunk, hair gone fully gray, skin sallow, and loose on a frame that had lost 40 pounds of prison food and 0 pounds of denial. Boots. Judge Miriam Castellano looked down from the bench, and there was nothing in her expression that resembled mercy. Mr. Bannister. Boots. You were entrusted with the sacred duty of protecting the most vulnerable people of this city. Instead, you became a predator with a badge. Boots. You used the uniform as a shield while you stole, terrorized, and ultimately took a human life to protect your own comfort. Boots. You are a profound disgrace to every honest officer who has ever worn that uniform, including, she paused, and something in her tone sharpened, including the ones this court has heard testimony about, who spent 20 years of honest service passed over because men like you were the ones deciding who deserved to rise. Boots. Marcus's hand, resting on his knee, found the small brass compass in his jacket pocket without him quite meaning to. Boots. On the federal counts of racketeering, grand embezzlement, evidence tampering, civil rights violations, and murder in the first degree, I sentence you to life in federal prison without possibility of parole. Boots. I am further ordering the full forfeiture of your pension, your assets, and your properties to be applied as restitution to the city of Atlanta and to the family of Ethan Marsh. Boots. You will leave this courtroom today with nothing. Boots. Before the gavel fell, Judge Castellano allowed one final statement, not from the prosecution, but from Ethan Marsh's mother, Dolores Marsh, a retired schoolteacher who had sat through every day of the trial in the second row of the gallery, knitting the same half-finished blue scarf she'd started the week her son died. Boots. She stood slowly, gripping the podium with both hands. "My son wrote about people nobody else would write about," she said, her voice small but perfectly steady in the silent courtroom. Boots. Tenants, whistleblowers. People the system forgot on purpose. He believed the truth mattered even when it cost something. It cost him everything. Boots. She looked directly at Bannister for the first time in 14 months. "I don't need you to be sorry. Sorry doesn't give me back a single Sunday dinner." Boots. "I need you to sit in a cell for the rest of your life and know exactly why you're there." Boots. "That's the only justice I get to have, and I intend to take every bit of it." Bannister did not look up. Boots. Dolores Marsh sat back down, picked up her knitting, and finished a single row before the judge spoke again. The gavel cracked like a rifle shot. Boots. Bannister folded forward in his chair, face in his manacled hands, a low sound tearing out of his throat that wasn't quite a sob, and wasn't quite anything else human beings have a word for. Boots. He did not turn to look at Marcus, he couldn't, but the real reckoning, the one that actually reached him, arrived 2 weeks later, and it didn't come from a courtroom at all. Boots. Because Bannister was a former officer who had violently abused his authority, the Bureau of Prisons determined he could not be safely housed in a standard facility. Boots. For his protection, he was transferred to United States Penitentiary Ashcombe, a high-security facility carved into the fog-bound ridgelines of the West Virginia mountains, a place where reputations from the outside world meant less than nothing. Boots. On his third day in general population, Bannister was released into the concrete recreation yard under a sky the color of wet ash. Boots. The wind cut straight through his thin canvas jacket. He looked up at the razor wire in the sniper towers and felt, for the first time in 19 years, entirely and permanently exposed. Boots. Near the weight racks, 3 heavily tattooed men stopped mid-set and turned to look at him. Boots. Bannister recognized all 3 instantly. Enforcers for a local syndicate he had personally framed 9 years earlier, planting narcotics in their cars and beating false confessions out of 2 of them in a holding cell to close a case fast and clean for the department. Boots. They had each lost the better part of a decade because of a lie he told without a second thought. Boots. They didn't rush him, they didn't shout. They simply smiled, slow, patient, promising smiles, and Bannister's breath caught somewhere behind his ribs. Boots. The realization arrived like a landslide. He was no longer the one who decided what happened to other people. Boots. He was, for the first time in his adult life, simply prey, and he understood in that single frozen moment on a concrete yard in the Appalachian fog that everything he had done to feel powerful had built the exact cage he now had to live inside for the rest of his natural life. Boots. 6 months into his sentence, Bannister requested a meeting with the prison chaplain. His first, and by all accounts his only, attempt at anything resembling reckoning. Boots. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked the chaplain to help him write a letter. It was never made public in full, but a portion was later read, with her permission, at a departmental ethics training session Amara Voss helped design for new recruits at the Atlanta Police Academy. Boots. One line from it stayed with the people who heard it. "I used to think the badge made the rules." Boots. "It just gave me a place to hide from them. It didn't undo anything. Ethan Marsh was still dead. Danny Pruitt still carried what he'd allowed to happen for the rest of his life." Boots. 19 years of a city's trust doesn't come back because one man finally says something true in a letter written from a cell he'll never leave. Boots. But it was, for what it was worth, the first honest sentence Cole Bannister had spoken since the night the compass on Marcus Whitfield's desk sat perfectly still while everything around it fell apart. Boots. Back in Atlanta, the rain tapped gently against brand-new reinforced glass doors at Whitfield Legal Group on a Thursday evening 8 months after the trial ended. Boots. Marcus sat behind his polished desk. The little brass compass returned to its usual place near the desk lamp, pouring 2 glasses of 18-year scotch. Boots. He slid one across to Victor Alvarez, who sat in the leather chair reviewing a closed case file for the last time before it went into the Federal Archive. Boots. To justice, Alvarez said, raising his glass, the real kind. To the truth, Marcus answered, the crystal ringing softly against crystal. Boots. It has a way of surviving the dark, if somebody's willing to sit still long enough to catch it. He took a slow sip and turned to look out over the glittering spread of the city, a skyline that had in its own slow and imperfect way gotten a little more honest. Boots. He thought about his father's badge, still in a drawer at home, never once stamped sergeant. He thought about Amara, 3 floors up in a federal building now, building cases instead of fearing them. Boots. He thought about the 11 officers named in the task force files who had quietly resigned rather than face the audit that followed. Men who would never make headlines, but whose absence from patrol cars across the city was its own small, unglamorous form of justice. Boots. He thought, too, about Priya Deshmukh, who had stood frozen on a stairwell landing for 40 minutes with a phone pressed to her ear, too scared to run and too loyal to leave. Boots. Marcus had made her lead counsel on the firm's new pro bono unit 6 months later, not as a reward, he'd told her, but because she'd already proven she could hold steady when it mattered, and nobody was watching. Boots. Her first case was the teenage boy who'd spent 4 months in juvenile detention on evidence Bannister fabricated. She got his record expunged in 11 weeks. Boots. She cried in her car afterward, alone in the parking garage, and told no one, and Marcus never mentioned it, because some kinds of pride don't need an audience to be real. Boots. He had taken down men who thought their power made them permanent before. But this one had a weight none of the others carried, because it hadn't just been about a courtroom win. Boots. It had been about proving, in the plainest terms he knew how, that the law was never supposed to be a weapon for the powerful to swing at the people beneath them. Boots. It was supposed to be a shield held up for the people who had none. None of it brought Ethan Marsh back to his mother's table. Boots. None of it undid 4 months a teenage boy spent in a cell for a crime he never committed. Or 19 years of officers passed over the way his father had been passed over. Boots. Justice, Marcus had come to understand a long time ago, doesn't erase what happened. It just refuses to let it keep happening to the next person, and the person after that. Boots. That refusal was the only kind of victory that had ever meant anything to him, and it was enough. And as long as Marcus Whitfield was standing behind that desk, that shield was going to hold. Boots. Somewhere out past the window, the compass needle sat exactly where it had sat for 30 years, pointed at nothing useful, and yet somehow, every single time, pointing him exactly where he needed to be.